when you get dealt to. All right, okay. I think we're live. Hopefully we are. Otherwise, can't even. I'm going to be careful not to swear. Right, okay. Your meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Right. Let's start the recording somewhere. Sugar, right. Sugar, honey, iced tea, as they say. Okay, so, folks, we're live. So no more swearing. I've put all the 50p's in. And I've forgotten all the other stuff. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Right. Okay. We're live. Let's get going. All right. Enough of chit chat and all the good stuff we were talking about earlier. Welcome to this week's TPP show. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing, but that's normal. That's every week. Luckily for me, I've got two people who know exactly what they're doing. Right. So I'm going to wing it and they're going to do it properly. My co-host is Charanjit. Welcome, Charanjit. And we've got a special guest for you. I'm going to do a little intro and then. So hello, say hello, Charanjit, and
hello, hi everyone.
Yeah, fantastic, and it was a great show last week. In case you missed it, and we're going to try and get Bernadette back on and talk about that super great topic about social property and her fantastic project. So Charanjit, if you can twist her arm, we'd love to get her back on the show and tell us about that really interesting project.
Definitely.
This week's show. Returning superstar guest, right? So I'm going to try and listen, learn, and it's going to be really difficult for me to keep my mouth closed because, I've had too much chocolate and I've had too much caffeine this afternoon, right? I've gone past my deadline. Anyway, look, enough talking, right? We're going to introduce a resident legal litigation expert. And I think we just asked her, does she do conveyancing? She says, no, she does proper law like litigation, right? So welcome back, Rima. I'm going to try and keep quiet, give us a little rundown, and then we're going to have a nice little chat. And we were having a really interesting chat before I interrupted everybody and put them live on the show. So, Rima, quick introduction, and let's go for it.
Thank you, Dil. So that introduction was brief and short. I was hoping you'd carry on.
Listen, you're not going to win. You might get your wish later on.
So I'm a property litigation solicitor. I deal with all types of property, residential and commercial property disputes. I've come on the show before, spoken about various different topics. Today we're going to keep it quite simple and light and retouch on some of the most popular areas at the moment, which are residential property evictions. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a checklist as to what you should be doing when you enter into a new tenancy agreement, if you're a landlord with a tenant, or even if it is a case that you hand it to managing agents. It doesn't mean that you've discharged your liability as a property owner or as a landlord. You can still be held liable if the property agents haven't done something that they ought to have done, because ultimately it may be that you're the named landlord, and also of course the property is yours. What I would say is briefly at the outset is quite essential. What I'm finding is a lot of landlord clients of mine who are coming to me saying that they want to evict their tenants because there's been substantial rental arrears, and of course it's very difficult for tenants at the moment because we're dealing with cost of living crisis, costs of energy bills, rentals, everything's going up, so people are naturally struggling. One of the things, I mean, if you are somebody who's vetting tenants or are instructing agents, I would say work with them, take an active role as to who you're entering into the tenancy agreement with, what their personal circumstances are, and make provisions for that. Because if you work with your tenants, of course, you're unlikely to be in that position later on whereby you have to instruct lawyers to seek possession of the property because ultimately there's been a fallout or payment hasn't been made, etc. for rental. Now, first things first, you've got to make sure that you serve a gas safety certificate on the tenants, or make sure your agents are doing that on your behalf. Make sure an EPC certificate is provided. Make sure if you take a deposit that's protected within the first 30 days. Make sure that you give them how to rent guide as well, okay? And also there's the EICR certificates. All of those things, they are quite important to be given to the tenant at the very outset of the tenancy. And of course, the deposit protection is a hot topic because it can be quite easy where there is a oversight and you fail to protect the deposit, which means that the tenants can recover up to 3 times the deposit amount as a failure or penalty for the landlord failing to protect the deposit when it's paid within the prescribed time frame. It's just something that needs to be done. It's strict liability that if you haven't done it, then the court can fine you up to 3 times. There are mitigating circumstances that are taken into account if the matter ever reaches court, but of course you want to try and avoid that. So make sure you protect it, give the tenants information about where the deposit is protected, make sure that you give them prescribed information as well, and make sure you keep copies and evidence of everything. Again, it's quite basic. Get the tenancy agreement signed as well. If there's guarantors, that can help quite often if the tenant's not able to pay. So those are the kind of things that would help both tenant and the landlord. And in terms of gas safety and EPC certificates, gas safety is renewed every year, so make sure you keep on top of that. If you don't have a gas safety certificate and there are issues with the tenancy and you want to serve a Section 21 notice, which is a no-fault eviction, you will not be able to do that. So you'd have to serve a Section 21 notice before you'll have to serve a gas safety certificate before you serve the notice, but it should be done and renewed and provided to the tenant every year, and of course at the commencement of the tenancy or prior. Now, how can you, if you find yourself in a situation whereby, we'll deal with a situation where there are rental arrears, what do you do if there are rental arrears? First thing is try and resolve it with the tenant directly, agree a payment plan if possible. But quite often what happens is clients that come to me, and landlords, they've got their own mortgage payments, or they're tied into a finance and they rely on the rental payment. So you've got ultimately sometimes no option but to actually try and evict the tenant. And if that is the case, and you can't come to a resolution with the tenant directly, then you'd need to serve what's called a Section 8 notice. And it's quite key that the notice is served correctly, because lots of times people try and give it a go themselves to serve the notice, and they come to us and, you know, you've wasted a month or 14 days that you have to provide, because if there's 2-month rental arrears, that's when you can serve a Section 8 notice. You've got to have 2 months rental arrears, and you've got to make sure that you provide enough notice. It's not just strictly 14 days that you've got to give in the notice. You've got to make sure that you allow for days for service, as the civil procedure rules require you to. So by service, I mean, you know, you post it and you've got to allow this few additional days from the day you post it. So that's why it's quite key. It's quite key that you actually engage with a legal representative to get that served, because if the form isn't correct, or the right time frame hasn't been given, or the right grounds haven't been relied on for the Housing Act, then the notice could be defective, and that means that you could have issues getting possession order months down the line when you end up in court. Another thing to bear in mind with Section 8 is that it's a mandatory, as long as you can prove 2 months rental arrears, the court will give you a mandatory possession order, but you have to prove that there are 2-month rental arrears. And quite often what can happen is, if at the date of the hearing, the rental arrears, or the tenant makes a payment on the day to reduce the rental arrears of less than 2 months, you won't get a possession order, unless of course you've relied on other grounds in the Section 8 notice, which are non-mandatory grounds or discretionary grounds. And if you have relied on those grounds, then maybe even if the tenant makes that payment, you can still ask the court to give you a possession order on the basis of those discretionary grounds. So that's Section 8 really. You can serve, most commonly it's used when there are 2 months, when there's rental arrears, and you've got to wait until minimum 2 months rental arrears have accrued. And then after 14 days, relying on the relevant grounds of the notice, you can issue court proceedings if the tenant doesn't leave. And once you issue court proceedings, you'll get a hearing date, usually listed for about 15 minutes. you attend the hearing, either your solicitor would or barrister, and normally you get the possession order, providing still at that date there are those 2 months rental arrears as you relied on the notice. Of course, you've got to do witness statement before you attend the hearing, just to do a chronology as to what's happened, how the rental arrears have accrued, etc. But that's all part and parcel of, I don't want to go into the details of how you prepare for a claim, but that's really a basic summary of how you can rely on Section 8 to obtain a possession order when there are financial matters arising from a tenancy. Now, another way by which you could terminate a tenancy is by serving a Section 21 notice. It's quite often, there are talks about abolishing the Section 21 notice, if not actually modifying the grounds upon which you can claim a possession order under the Section 21 notice. And really at the moment, it's what we call a no-fault eviction. You give tenant 2-month notice, and the notice would be valid if you've served all the documents we spoke about at the outset, which is the gas safety deposit information, EPC, and how to rent guide has been provided to the tenant. If those things haven't been provided, you've got to make sure that you provide them before you serve the notice. Yes, you can correct it later on if you haven't done it at the outset, but the best practice is to serve it at the outset, because there could be issues later on. So Section 21 notice, you give 2 months, 2 months to the tenant to vacate. If the tenant doesn't vacate, again, it's a paper exercise. It's called accelerated procedure to obtain possession order. And you apply after the expiry of the 2-month notice. Again, allow days for service and check with somebody who's served those notices, not agents. I would advise people to be very, very mindful of getting a legal job done by parties who necessarily are not dealing with those kind of matters or not experts in that field, because things again can go wrong, and then you've lost 2 months, or you've lost the court fees, or you've lost all the valuable time whereby you could have been in a better position, and so could the tenant, because sometimes the tenants are waiting to be housed by the council. So after the expiry of the 2 months, you accelerated procedure, you fill out the claim form and you send it to the court with all your evidence, and the court looks at the papers and they will give the tenant time to respond. If the tenant doesn't respond, then you can request for possession, and it's all dealt with on paper. So it's a paper exercise. Really, there's not a hearing unless, of course, there are objections that the tenant or a defense that a tenant will file when the claim is issued and they're notified by the court. So those are the 2 most commonly used ways to obtain possession of your residential property. And really, that's, I mean, as long as you are making sure that you're working with the tenant, you're serving all the compliant documents, it should be a straightforward exercise. But quite often what we find is that people try and do things themselves, or they instruct agents to do these things, or documents or deposit hasn't been protected. I think all of those loose ends need to be tied up before you take steps to recover possession of the property, because once you issue a notice or once a claim is issued, it can get quite messy. So it's best to work with the tenants, make sure you're compliant with the Housing Act, and make sure you check your steps, so to waste time and costs, and don't just try and do things yourself, because everything is available on Google these days. So yeah, that's all I'm going to cover today, and of course, if anybody's got any questions, by all means, you can reach out to me directly. Surinder is not here. Dil, you're appearing to be, your name shows Surinder, but you're on mute.
Well, it's a good job, because I was getting my lipstick on like Surinder does, but anyway, that's a different thing. I'm borrowing his Zoom because I forgot to put the 50p's in my own Zoom. Anyway, Surinder's skiving. He's doing a bit of a skive for a little while. He's anyway. we won't disclose the secret location. Charanjit's got a question before I pass on to Charanjit. You mentioned the acceleration procedure. Roughly, what is that? Really quickly, in 3 minutes or less?
That's the Section 21 procedure. It's called an accelerated route to possession.
Damn, my internet's breaking down now. Right. Can I sue my landlord for crap internet? Sorry.
I would suggest you try and work with your landlord to sort out the internet issues.
That's not very litigious, is it? You know, come on, what are you like? All right.
People have this awful reputation about litigation lawyers, and essentially we want people to resolve things. It's only when things don't get resolved we get involved to help them, but it's not to encourage arguments.
That's why we have you on, because if we wanted a naughty lawyer, we'd get someone else, right? So okay, back to this accelerated thing. I've got to get this clear in my head, because it just explain what that is. Is that when they move it for a faster eviction date?
No, it's not. It's just the Section 21 route. You serve a notice, providing you're compliant with the Housing Act and you've served all the documentation prior to serving, all the compliant documentation, gas safety, EPC, how to rent guide, the deposit's been protected. All those things have been done. You can serve a Section 21 notice, giving 2 months to the tenant to vacate. And then if they don't vacate, you issue the claim, and it's all dealt with by paper, unless, of course, there is a dispute about the entire process or documentation or anything within that the tenant advances. Usually it's all dealt with by paper.
So if the landlord's forgotten to give them a gas cert, they can do it before issuing the notice, is that right?
They can do, yes, that's right. It's not ideal, that's not what you want, because the judges don't like to see that. So it's best to do it at the outset of the tenancy, but you can correct that mistake later on before you serve the notice. And it's interesting, your rules of service. Can you give us a bit more? So in the Party Wall Act, we have to serve it by, you don't do it by recorded delivery. Is that a similar principle there? Well, you can do it by recorded delivery if you want to make sure that the tenants received it, but first class post is just as good. Just
post it, basically, yeah?
First class post, usually, yeah.
Right, and get proof of postage, because that's how we do it in the Party Wall Act.
Yeah, you can get, I mean, it's called, we rely on deemed service when it comes.
That's it, that's the word?
Yeah.
And how many days is deemed service in your opinion?
Second working day after the day it's been posted.
There you go. Remember, I'm just a surveyor. This is a proper lawyer. Second working day, not second day, second working day. And that counts as day one, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm going to give you a bonus for that. Now I'm going to try and keep quiet for 5 minutes. Charanjit, I believe you've got some questions about your castles and your golf courses in Scotland, right?
Well, sort of. Yeah, we would.
No,
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that yeah, I have some buy-to-lets in Scotland, and I understand that there's an eviction ban at the moment due to the cost of living crisis. So unless there's exceptional circumstances, like the tenants in arrears, you know, on their rent, or you know, there's a figure of how much it's £2,000 plus they're in arrears, then actually right now we can't evict them.
Yeah, it's quite different in Scotland. We had that during COVID, but not as a result of the cost of living crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
Not yet anyway.
No, not yet.
Yeah, because it was during COVID that was in place in Scotland too. So I only just recently discovered that.
It may well follow. Yeah, it may well.
Yeah, yeah.
That would certainly help a lot of people. But then on the contrary, it would. You know, there's issues that landlords would take with that. So yeah.
Yeah, so my other question was, like, where you've got agents in, like, managing the property. So were you talking about serving the compliance documents to the tenant? you know, I know what I do with my properties. It's like, you know, the agents kind of take care of that. Whether they're serving them to the tenant or not, I have no idea. Is that something I should be checking, or is that necessary? Yeah.
Absolutely, because if you're the landlord on the tenancy agreement, ultimately that's your responsibility. You may not always get away with saying I handed it to the agent, because if you look at your management agreement, or your agreement with the agents, yes, you may have a course of action against them, because if it specifies in that they will be responsible for serving all of these compliant documents under the Housing Act. But if they don't, and you want possession of your property, what do you do at that point? If they have failed, you're then separately claiming breach of contract claim against the agents, and then you've got a correct possession with the tenants, because you want possession.
Right.
Because you're ultimately the landlord, if you are the landlord on the property. But even if you're not the landlord on the tenancy agreement, which can often be the case, that the agents would name themselves as landlords, then you're relying at their mercy to actually get the tenant out, because they're the landlord on the agreement. Yes, you do have legal rights as the proprietor if the landlord in that agreement wouldn't do it and you've handed it over, but quite often, 9 out of 10 times, you would be the named landlord on the tenancy agreement when the agents will draft it.
Right. Okay. So, okay, good idea to check the tenancy, the management agreement then. Yes, to see exactly what it says. Yes. And thanks for that, Reema. I think my other question was, you know, with the Section 21 notice, you said it was a no-fault eviction. So does that, by saying that, are we saying that there doesn't need to be any grounds for repossession? You're just putting in an application for repossession, and there doesn't need to be any justification for that. Yeah,
you can't immediately serve it after the tenancy has commenced. You've got to wait, I think, somewhat 4 months. But then after that, you can serve the notice, providing you're compliant with the Housing Act.
Great. Okay, thank you.
What does that mean, compliant with the Housing Act, as in?
As in all the documentation that I mentioned that you've got to serve at the outset of the tenancy and protect the deposit.
Okay, so if someone's gotten the what the hell? Sorry, I was going to swear in a minute. What the heck's the EPC got to do with anything? Yeah,
it's energy performance certificate. You've got to serve it in order for you to, if you want to serve a Section 21 notice. Firstly, it's an obligation. You've got to give it to the tenant when the tenancy starts.
Hang on, wait. Let me bang my head against the wall. Sorry, yeah, go on.
So you've got to give it to the tenant when the tenancy starts.
Right.
They're available online. You can even direct them to a link.
Okay.
And do that. But if you haven't done that, you can't serve a Section 21 notice. You've got to do it. You can correct it later before you serve the notice, but that's not the best practice. You should be giving EPC to the tenant and a gas safety certificate and an EICR certificate.
Sorry, what's an EICR?
Again, it's an electrical report certificate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To do that. And again, protecting the deposit, how to rent guide, all of those things you've got to give to the tenant at the outset. If you don't, then you can't serve Section 21 notice.
But you can correct it before you serve the 21.
Correct it, yes, but that's not best practice.
Interesting.
I'm
sorry, gonna have a word with my landlord because he hasn't put enough 50p's in my Wi-Fi. But sorry. So you corrected all that stuff by giving them all of that paperwork the day before you serve notice, right?
Yeah, you can do. You can. It's
not the best plan, but that's a good enough plan B, yeah? And then during the lockdown, I was on so many Zooms. I mean, I think I overdosed on that stuff. I still haven't found the key to my front door. I haven't managed to get out yet, but she's laughing. They were talking about removing Section 21.
Yeah, there is still those discussions. There is a proposed bill where, there's talks about abolishing the Section 21. It has gone far. There are going to be modifications made to the no-fault evictions and grounds upon which you can seek possession under Section 21. So it is going to be narrowed. We're waiting on the exact sort of details of that. But for now, it is going ahead as no fault.
Okay, for now, everything as before.
Yeah, but it is coming.
It is coming.
Yeah.
There's a statement by Rima. Watch out, Section 21 stuff is coming.
Yeah.
Any ideas when, or should we ask John on that?
Let's
John in on
ask
that one,
John
shouldn't we?
on that. He would know.
Sorry?
Let's ask John on that.
Well, we should give him a grilling before he gets on there. Say, John, come on, sort us out. You're our mate in the House of Lords. Mind you, if we get...
He's probably playing part to these.
What was that? Sorry, what was that?
I said, I'm sure he's actively playing a good part in these discussions. And
I learned something really interesting from the last interview. Apparently, property rights are a human right. I thought they were just greedy capitalists, but it's part of your human rights thing.
There is a particular element in your when you issue claims for possession, if talking about whether this impacts your human rights, and most often, you know, again, it depends. I mean, when there's housing issues, concerns, children involved, that's right to home, having a roof above your head. So.
No, he was talking about property rights as in it's your right as a landlord or as a property owner to benefit from the property and make sure government can't take it away from you without adequate compensation. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. That's a different angle of human rights.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. It's in the UN stuff. I didn't even know this. I thought, wow, they just make human rights are all about dogs and cats and making sure you can be with your cat, right? And making sure you got your landlord's...
An interesting take on the law.
Sorry, what was that?
I said you have an interesting take on the law and the legal system, don't you, Dil?
No comment.
I'm surprised we're still friends. Every time I speak, I'm thinking.
You're thinking, you were Terrence, it's laughing. You're thinking, how do I get rid of him? He won't leave me alone. Let me cross. Let him put him in the naughty corner, and you know. Anyway, look, it's all. Yes, I do have an interesting take in the law. I'm glad this is not a law show. It's just about property, right? That almost rhymes. Rima, thank you for that. Charanjit, more questions about your castles and your golf courses?
No. I'm just wondering, Rima, as a sort of litigation solicitor, what kind of cases do you see most of? You know, what do people normally?
There's a lot of there's been a rise in residential and commercial property evictions at the moment, and I do imagine that is because people are struggling. People are genuinely, businesses are struggling. Residential tenants are struggling to pay rents and meet demands. So you know, there's quite a bit of people wanting to get out of leases early. That's quite a hot topic as well at the moment, because there's been an extension of the ULEZ area, of course, and what that's meant is that people's businesses have been affected. People they're not getting as much traffic as they would normally, because the ULEZ zone has been extended. So, you know, lots of things that are happening have affected commercial tenants as well. So they're looking to surrender their leases or come to an agreement, and you know, that's quite a hot topic. And then afterwards, you've got dilapidations. People are just leaving premises, and that goes for commercial tenants as well, not just residential. And then you're left with dilapidations and the landlord's chasing you for dilapidation. So I think good thing is, whether it's residential or commercial, you should always be carrying out regular inspections at the property or the premises. And then of course there is an option on the commercial side, which we can touch on another day, is to serve interim schedule of dilapidations and things like that. Because once you get to that point where there's a fallout between the landlord and the tenant, it can become quite difficult and things become litigious. So it's best to try and sort of keep on top of things during the course of the tenancy and the term.
Right, interesting. Now, we know you have expertise in commercial versions of Section 21 or the leases. Will you come back and do a program on that, please?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and Charanjit, any more questions before, you know, we know we've pulled you out of a interesting boardroom meeting where you were about to go legal on some people, I'm supposing, or doing some lawyer stuff on them. Sharon, have you got any more questions?
No, yeah, no, that was really interesting. I'm just thinking, about the impact that the ULEZ has had actually on commercial properties, on shop fronts where, they don't have the footfall they used to because, of these restrictions. And I mean, that's bound to affect the value of the leases as well. I would have thought so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really hard, isn't it, for landlords at the moment, in some ways, if we look at it.
Yeah, I think it's been awfully difficult and challenging time for everybody, landlord and tenants. And I think the key is to try and minimize your losses and mitigate them, so as to you can try and resolve it or come to some sort of plans. I mean, I've recently had an issue, a big rental arrears on the commercial front because restaurant was closed during COVID, and there was all sorts of issues of arrears occurring as a result of that and prior to it, and thereafter it's taken a lot of time for businesses to pick back up. And I think you're right, it's a very difficult time for everybody.
Yeah, they're just coming out of like COVID, and when they've lost sales, and now they're challenged with the energy price rises and interest rate rises and what's happening generally globally.
Yeah, I mean, you look at tube prices going up, and what isn't going up anymore. It's a very expensive time to be alive.
My test for inflation is how many 50p's I have to put in the program, and it's I have to put more and more 50p's. I keep running out of my pile of 50p's. So look, before the finish,
before this gets quite expensive for us all, we should
exactly right. So and I'm going to have to start appeal for 50p's, because otherwise we can't keep this program going. So if you're a viewer watching this program, like and subscribe, and then send me your 50p's, because we have to keep putting them. This is why we're having Wi-Fi problems, right?
We've got to fund the show, hey.
Yeah. Well, some of you people don't even know about 50p meters anyway. It's all online.
And what are we going to do when digital currency comes in, Jill? You won't have
Listen, I'm already having nightmares about Section 21, Section 8, ULEZ, lack of 50p's, and now you're talking about digital currencies. Don't start that one up, right? We're going to have problems to deal with. Right, Rima, your details, have you got them ready and present? And I'll put an extra 50p. So hang on, let me make sure you can share them on the screen. Wait. I've jumped the gun a little bit. I've got to put this. I've got to now look at digital 50p's for my homework. Like, if world wasn't actually, I'm quite a fan of digital currencies. I have got some, but I don't know how to check it anymore. I think I got 50p's worth of Bitcoin now. Right. Anyway, Rima, put your details up on screen so people who've messed it up can put their stuff right and get a hold of you. Would you mind?
No, absolutely. I'm just figuring out how I do that though.
You got to put 50p in your computer so it could show the slide.
I'm living in the digital currency world now already. So you'll have to give me your account details. I'll put it through, Dill.
Yeah, good luck with that one, right? This is a true story. Every time I go to a parking meter, they don't take 50p's anymore, or pound coins, or credit cards. I phone up and put the thing on, right? Yeah. And all my mates say to me, "Why don't you use the app?" I said, "No, my phone's special. It doesn't handle the app." I hate those parking app things. But anyway, right. So you got two promises. You're going to come back and do a commercial program for us.
Yeah. Happy to do that. Yeah.
And you're going to do a special presentation, which I think we discussed, right? Whenever you're ready on that one. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, the one you messaged me about. Yes.
Yeah. So. Don't tell anybody. It's going to be a surprise, because that's a really interesting program.
Yeah. I think I find that topic very interesting. I mean, a lot of people out there, and of course we're now talking in code language. So I'll just we'll have that conversation off camera.
Yeah. So that is. I thought when I put that on WhatsApp to you, I thought this can't be right. It's contrary to everything. This is what I was taught, right? And I thought this can't be right until you had a look at it. And I'm guessing you're agreeing with most of the content that we're going to put together for our audience.
Yeah.
This program Rima is going to do for us will absolutely blow your mind if you're in the property business. It's just going to, you know, we've had some earth-shattering programs, but the one Rima's going to do for us is going to be unbelievable. We can't talk about it. It's going to be unbelievable. Right, sorry, enough of my talking. Put your details on the screen, please.
So what I'll do is I'm struggling to actually share.
Okay, we'll put yours in the chat or something.
Yeah, so what I think might be best is that if this is going to go on various platforms, I will comment on the Facebook group, provide my details.
Great.
Reach out to me from
so
there.
you're going to use your digital 50p's for the Facebook group.
Yeah, I'll leave my details there.
Fantastic.
And if you want to get in touch, then please do feel free to do so.
Right.
But I'm struggling to share the screen right now, so yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Don't worry, I've done that. Right. Okay, great. Look, thank you for taking the time out. Last minute, unfortunately, lastminute.com as usual, but never mind. You should know what we're like. Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks for having me, and I hope that's been helpful. Very short and brief, but I think people have shorter attention spans on a Thursday at 5 o'clock. So I'm sure there's better things to do.
Next challenge is, can you do it under 60 seconds next time? Right.
I'll try.
All right, great. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Rima. That was really great. Nice to meet you. Okay.
And you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Charanjit, that was an interesting program, right?
That was great. I thought that was really good. You know, sometimes just these basic things, you know, we forget about. So it's really useful to go over them and remind ourselves.
Yeah. Make sure you're always doing the basics, which is boring, but
yeah.
But me and Rima. Sorry?
I said it has to be done. It's boring, but it has to be done.
Yeah. Now, me and Rima are coming up with a really good program. You guys are going to love this one. I can't even share it with you. It's so secretive, right? But we had a really good guest last week. If you can get Bernadette back on, and we had a pre-meeting discussion.
Yep.
We had the budget yesterday, right?
Yep, we did.
Any thoughts on that? I know we haven't planned for this bit. But...
Yeah, no, not quite yet. I mean, yeah, there's some interesting bits in it. I think I need to go over it, really, to be honest. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
there's some surprises.
You know about money as well. That's your former life, right? You used to be in the business. We expect a full commentary from you next week, right? I think we've got Bank of England going on next week somewhere, if I'm right.
Yeah, you said, yeah.
Right, we should have a mortgage guy next week, our regular mortgage.
That'll be very interesting in the light of all these, what's happened recently with the banks.
Okay. I think they're not going to put the rates up because of the Silicon Valley Bank debacle. What's your 30-second view on that?
I agree. I heard something that they were debating whether it would be 0 or 0.25. And in fact, some people were saying that they might even put interest rates down.
I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to put them down. But apparently, one of the reasons the Silicon Valley Bank went pear-shaped, shall we say, was because of the fast rate of increases. The treasury bonds they were holding lost their value, so they had to make a call to the shareholders. And one of the shareholders said, no, we're not going to give you any more money. And I think I heard this morning the same thing's happening with Credit Suisse. One of their shareholders said, no, you can't have any more money because we haven't got any left either.
Yeah, I think they've been saved, though. I read something that they have actually been saved.
Well, I hope so. Credit Suisse is like the Swiss government, isn't it? I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's been around 150 years or something. I think it's not one of the new banks. So interesting times, really.
That's longer than some current countries, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Longer than most countries.
It is, but yeah. So let's see. I think I don't really know. I don't really think we know what's happening, and whether this is the beginning of a financial crisis, or whether the central banks will bail out these banks is the question, really, isn't it? They didn't bail out the ones that went down. So
No, they bailed out. They ran out of money bailing out 1, 2, and 3, didn't they? This is when they got to number 4, they said we haven't got any more money left. That's why.
Oh, yes.
That's why Merrill Lynch went down in 2008.
Yeah.
I think hopefully they've learned their lesson. There's a really interesting program on the Silicon Valley bank run. Because they're special. There's a guy called Peter Thiel, really interesting. He's a really interesting guy. So he's a VC guy, and the crux of it is because it's a very small. You know, when I heard Silicon Valley Bank, I thought, what's that got to do with England? Those guys are over this. You know, it's like, yeah, they're all in Silicon Valley, as it's in the name. But apparently, I was talking to a friend of mine that a lot of the payroll companies use that bank to run payroll.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And then the reason last week the bank run started on Silicon Valley Bank, anyway, we'll talk about this next week, was Peter Thiel said to all these VC guys, listen, pull your money out. And difference between this time and 2008, everyone's doing it on the laptop. So you didn't see the queues outside. But the run was faster than any bank previously. It was something like $42 billion were taken out in 24 hours. It's
Wow.
something ridiculous. That's why.
Wow.
And the Fed stepped in. Anyway, that's the discussion for next week. So stay tuned. Thank you for your time. That was an interesting show this week with Rima. I thought that was really interesting. It's like more bad news for landlords, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have to keep on top of things. Definitely.
And how do we do that?
By making sure we educate ourselves and we listen to programs like this.
Absolutely. I'm going to say you well done. Good. Right. Make sure you like. I forget to do this every week.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, like, subscribe, and whatever else your ring the bell and all the other stuff that you could do in these platforms nowadays.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Good show. It's really interesting, actually, today's. I can't wait for the cat defense from landlords and tenants saying, yeah, no, we can't do this because the cat's going to have no home. But sorry. I think some people get what I'm referring to there about the cats. And anyway.
Oh, you're not referring about human rights then? Or cat rights?
It's one and the same, right? If you know, nowadays, if you believe you're a cat, you have to be treated like a cat, right?
Exactly. Yeah, if you identify as one.
I'm going to try and identify as a tomato. Actually, hang on a minute. Do you remember this old Prudential ad? And all it's quite an old ad, right? And it was by Prudential, I'm pretty sure. So all these kids saying, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a nurse. And there's a kid who's slightly chubby, right? And he pushes this girl over. I want to be, and this is a bit horrible, right? I want to be an MD or something, you know. They were obviously having a little go at this little kid, right? And then my favorite line was when this kid goes, I want to be a tomato.
I don't remember that at all. But
oh, you've got to look. It's a really great ad. I feel like that all the time.
That. Really? Oh, wow. That kid was ahead of his time.
Exactly. I feel like that all the time. I want to be a tomato, right?
Okay.
I think you've read enough of me, right?
All right, bit weird, but never mind.
Honestly, find that ad online. It's really great. You know, sometimes you see these ads and these clips and memes. It's great. And that was so far ahead of its time. Right, that's enough of my nonsense. Okay. Thank you for coming in, keeping it sensible. Someone's going to try, right?
Well, yes, do my best.
Yeah,
okay.
You heard it. She does her best, but, you know, struggles, right? All right, we'll see everybody next week, and we'll give you an update on the budget. No, on the interest rates. Budget's already gone. We've got a budget update coming up as well, right?
Yeah, maybe we could do that next week as well.
No, I can't have two things in one go.
No, okay.
All right, we'll see. All right, see you next week.